Section 28 of the Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1, by James Boswell. Section 28. On Tuesday the 5th of July, I again visited Johnson. He told me he had looked into the poems of a pretty voluminous writer, Mr., now Dr. John Ogilvy, one of the Presbyterian ministers of Scotland, which had lately come out, but could find no thinking in them. Boswell. Is there not imagination in them, sir? Johnson. Why, sir, there is in them what was imagination, but it is no more imagination in him than sound is sound in the echo, and his diction, too, is not his own. We have long ago seen white-robed innocents and flower-bespangled meads. Talking of London, he observed, Sir, if you wish to have a just notion of the magnitude of this city, you must not be satisfied with seeing its great streets and squares, but must survey the innumerable little lanes and courts. It is not in the showy evolutions of buildings, but in the multiplicity of human habitations which are crowded together, that the wonderful immensity of London consists. I have often amused myself with thinking how different a place London is to different people. They whose narrow minds are contracted to the consideration of some one particular pursuit view it only through that medium. A politician thinks of it merely as the seat of government in its different departments, a grazier as a vast market for cattle, a mercantile man as a place where a prodigious deal of business is done upon change, a dramatic enthusiast as the grand scene of theatrical entertainments, a man of pleasure as an assemblage of taverns, and the great emporium for ladies of easy virtue. But the intellectual man is struck with it, as comprehending the whole of human life in all its variety, the contemplation of which is inexhaustible. On Wednesday, July the 6th, he was engaged to sup with me at my lodgings in Downing Street, Westminster, but on the preceding night, my landlord having behaved very rudely to me and some company who were there with me, I had resolved not to remain another night in his house. I was exceedingly uneasy at the awkward appearance I supposed I should make to Johnson and the other gentlemen whom I had invited, not being able to receive them at home, and being obliged to order supper at the Mitre. I went to Johnson in the morning, and talked of it as a serious distress. He laughed, and said, Consider, sir, how insignificant this will appear a 12-month hence. Were this consideration to be applied to most of the little vexatious incidents of life by which our quiet is too often disturbed, it would prevent many painful sensations. I have tried it frequently with good effect. There is nothing, continued he, in this mighty misfortune. Nay, we shall be better at the Mitre. I told him that I had been at Sir John Fielding's office, complaining of my landlord, and had been informed that though I had taken my lodgings for a year, I might, upon proof of bad behaviour, quit them when I pleased, without being under an obligation to pay rent for any longer than while I possessed them. The fertility of Johnson's mind could show itself even upon so small a matter as this. Why, sir, said he, I suppose this must be the law, since you have been told so in Bow Street. But if your landlord could hold you to your bargain, and the lodgings should be yours for a year, you may certainly use them as you think fit. So, sir, you may quarter 2 life-guardsmen upon him, or you may send the greatest scoundrel you can find into your apartments, or you may say that you want to make some experiments in natural philosophy, and may burn a large quantity of assafoetida in his house. I had as my guests this evening at the Mitre Tavern Dr. Johnson, Dr. Goldsmith, Mr. Thomas Davies, Mr. Eccles, an Irish gentleman, for whose agreeable company I was obliged to Mr. Davies, and the Reverend Mr. John Ogilvy, who was desirous of being in company with my illustrious friend, while I, in my turn, was proud to have the honour of showing one of my countrymen upon what easy terms Johnson permitted me to live with him. Note. The Northern Bard mentioned, page 421. When I asked Dr. Johnson's permission to introduce him, he obligingly agreed, adding, however, with a sly pleasantry, "But he must give us none of his poetry." It is remarkable that Johnson and Churchill, however much they differed in other points, agreed upon this subject. See Churchill's Journey. Under dark allegory's flimsy veil, let them with Ogilvy spin out a tale of rueful length. Churchill's Poems, 2, 329. It is, however, but justice to Dr. Ogilvy to observe that his Day of Judgment has no inconsiderable share of merit. End of note. Goldsmith, as usual, endeavoured with too much eagerness to shine, and disputed very warmly with Johnson against the well-known maxim of the British Constitution, "The King can do no wrong," affirming that what was morally false could not be politically true, and as the King might, in the exercise of his regal power, command and cause the doing of what was wrong, it certainly might be said, in sense and in reason, that he could do wrong. Johnson: "Sir, you are to consider that in our Constitution, according to its true principles, the King is the head. He is supreme, he is above everything, and there is no power by which he can be tried. Therefore it is, sir, that we hold the King can do no wrong, that whatever may happen to be wrong in government may not be above our reach, by being ascribed to majesty. Redress is always to be had against oppression by punishing the immediate agents. The King, though he should command, cannot force a judge to condemn a man unjustly. Therefore it is the judge whom we prosecute and punish. Political institutions are formed upon the consideration of what will most frequently tend to the good of the whole, although now and then exceptions may occur. Thus it is better in general that a nation should have a supreme legislative power, although it may be at times abused. And then, sir, there is this consideration, that if the abuse be enormous, nature will rise up, and, claiming her original rights, overturn a corrupt political system. I mark this animated sentence with peculiar pleasure, as a noble instance of that truly dignified spirit of freedom which ever glowed in his heart. Though he was charged with slavish tenets by superficial observers, because he was at all times indignant against that false patriotism, that pretended love of freedom, that unruly restlessness which is inconsistent with the stable authority of any good government. This generous statement, which he uttered with great fervour, struck me exceedingly, and stirred my blood to that pitch of fancied resistance, the possibility of which I am glad to keep in mind, but to which I trust I shall never be forced. "Great abilities," said he, "are not requisite for an historian, for in historical composition all the greatest powers of the human mind are quiescent. He has facts ready to his hand, so there is no exercise of invention. Imagination is not required in any high degree, only about as much as is used in the lower kinds of poetry. Some penetration, accuracy, and colouring will fit a man for the task, if he can give the application which is necessary." Bayle's Dictionary is a very useful work for those to consult who love the biographical part of literature, which is what I love most. Talking of the eminent writers in Queen Anne's reign, he observed, "I think Dr. Arbuthnot was the first man among them. He was the most universal genius, being an excellent physician, a man of deep learning, and a man of much humour. Mr. Addison was, to be sure, a great man. His learning was not profound, but his morality, his humour, and his elegance of writing set him very high." Mr. Ogilvy was unlucky enough to choose for the topic of his conversation the praises of his native country. He began with saying that there was very rich land round Edinburgh. Goldsmith, who had studied physic there, contradicted this, very unruly, with a sneering laugh. Disconcerted a little by this, Mr. Ogilvy then took new ground, where, I suppose, he thought himself perfectly safe, for he observed that Scotland had a great many noble wild prospects. Johnson: "I believe, sir, you have a great many. Norway, too, has noble wild prospects, and Lapland is remarkable